Welcome everyone to yet another week of SDN Community Voices. I'm very happy to be here with all of you that are joining us online. My name is Felipe and I am a SDN ambassador and also your host for this week. And I'm very happy to bring today probably one of the biggest voices in service design, Marc Stickdorn, to the stage and just have a chat with him. And remember that you can post any questions that you have throughout the session. And by the end, we're going to have a little bit of time to ask him some questions also. So welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you for coming. I know that you had quite a busy couple of weeks, so it's great to have you here. But I'll ask you just to introduce yourself. Maybe most people know who you are, but
Happy to. I'm Marc Stickdorn. I live in Innsbruck, Austria, in the middle of the Alps. Today was the first day that it snowed all the way down to the valley, so winter's coming here. Yes, it's freezing cold already. I work in the field of service design since more than 15 years, published some books in service design, like This is Service Design Thinking back in 2010, This is Service Design Doing in 2018. Currently working on a new book called This is Journey Management, and I help organizations to embed and scale service design, and I run a software company where we focus since more than 12 years now on bringing journey mapping and journey management into organizations all over the world, called Smaply.
Amazing. And I mean, your new book is also very much related to the talk you had at SDGC 23 and also the SDN Course Academy. So for whoever doesn't really know, how would you define journey management in just a few words, or like an elevator pitch of that?
Well, it's basically how you should be using journey maps all along. It's operationalized journey maps. So understanding that you can nest journeys into each other, you can build a hierarchy out of maps, like similar, you can zoom in and out of maps like we know it for maps and geography. You can also zoom in and out in journey maps, and then you add a layer of data on it where you connect it, hopefully you integrate with live tools so it becomes a dashboard. But you can also use it for decision making. That's actually the core idea of what we should be using journey maps for. So it becomes a basis for decision making to understand which pain points should we focus on next, which opportunities should we pursue next, and use it as a common board for basically the whole organizations to understand how we're performing from a customer perspective and what should we be doing next.
Yeah,
that was a 1-minute pitch.
Yeah, that was great. And I mean, how would you say that compares to what people are doing right now? What are kind of the main things that people have to reconsider on the current ways they're working?
I don't think it's a thing about what they do now and what they do in the future or something. It's rather about different use cases of journey maps. And I always like to differentiate between 3 different use cases. A very common use case to use journey maps as part of workshops. You do current state maps with customers, for example, or with frontline staff to understand what are current pain points people are having. How do folks currently perceive the service we're offering? What is their customer experience or their employee experience? Or we use future state maps in workshops as a way to prototype and imagine, like, what are things we could improve and how could this look like if we implement this new element into our service. But the idea of these workshop maps is always to trigger a conversation and to give people what's called a boundary object, to make sure that everyone has a common perspective. We make sure we talk about the same thing. But the map itself is not so important. It's more the conversations people are having in front of it. Yeah. The second use case is then using maps as part of a project, where you typically use it to collect all your research data, to visualize it, to identify patterns in it. From current state maps, then spin off different future state maps. But usually after a project, these maps end up in a drawer or end up like on the back of a wall, and it's a nice background, but you don't update them, you don't use it anymore. It's like you just use it once and that's it. And it's so sad to see that, because so much work went into it, and then you realize that a different team in a different department is probably doing exactly the same research to build exactly the same map, but use it then maybe for a different focus. And that's what we tackle with the third use case of maps called management maps. And it's not new. I mean, companies are doing that for more than 10 years, but different tool sets now help you to streamline that and embed it more and more into your current workflow, but through integrations of data or planning tools and so on. And the core idea is really to operationalize these maps and to keep them up to date. So building out a governance structure around it. Who's in charge for this map? Who can make decisions for this map? So understanding better the organizations, how we take decisions on which projects we do, how do we allocate budget, and all of that can become part of the governance system around Journey. So they really become a management tool.
Yeah. So it becomes something that is moving from the static map, as you're saying, that you just do it once, you leave it there and forget about it. And then there's a lot of other people maybe doing the same static things, and something that's a lot more dynamic and is growing with the process, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And tools are just like the software you use for that is just the software. The more important thing is really the governance structure around it, and how do you put it into practice? And how do you make sure that if you identify things, you actually follow up on it and have an impact on the user?
Yeah. And then it goes to what you're saying about the decision making also. If you have a better understanding of the entire process, it makes it much easier then later on to pinpoint the decision making and understand where you're coming from.
Yes. And if you think of journeys as a hierarchy, different levels of journeys speak to different hierarchy levels of decision making in the organization. On the highest level map, you talk often about rather big strategic decisions, also with different effect on an innovation horizon. We rather talk about big changes that take more time. The more you go into details, the more you go into different teams, and different teams with their own budget. Like you have a team responsible for this part of a product or this part of the experience, and they can do changes and improvements in it. But it's often the nice thing to connect all of these, so you understand what are all these little initiatives, how are they paying into the next bigger journey, to understand what are the changes we're doing, are we following the same vision for a service. And the vision of an organization is often something very blurry and fluffy, like we want to become the fastest or the biggest or whatever. But if you really nail it down to a journey and say, what is the future state journey? Like, what is our aspirational journey in like horizon 3 in 5 to 7 years? And then you can use where you are right now, where you want to be, to identify all these gaps. And all of this actually drives your roadmap of what you should be doing in the next years.
Yeah. And what would you say is the main challenges to implement this type of journey mapping?
It's less about the journey mapping. It's more, again, about the way we work, right? Like what we're talking about is service design at scale. One of the challenges is if people start getting really enthusiastic about mapping and like create loads of maps, dozens of maps, hundreds of maps, and then you ask them, so how many of them do you actually use, like on a daily, weekly, monthly, even quarterly basis? And they start realizing, oh shoot, we're actually mapping a lot, but we're not acting on it. And that is typically one mistake I see. We're really into mapping things and maybe monitoring things, but does the organization have the capabilities to actually act upon what we discovered? And if we don't grow this acting upon together with the approach, then after a while people get frustrated because you start documenting things and adding pain points to it, but nothing's happening with it.
Yeah. So there's a little bit of the actionable part of it that's very important, not just mapping everything, but making sure that you're taking the next step and making something that is actually implementable.
Absolutely. And we don't need the map for everything. Like if I go to my supermarket, which is down the road, I don't need a map for it. I know how it works. Like relate that to the work we're having. If we work on something where there is a given standard, we know exactly what we need to do, probably you don't need a map for it. Just do it. But sometimes it makes sense to map because you have to juggle loads of different stakeholders. You need to make sure that everyone is aligned on it. You need to understand where do we have an issue and what are the next ones we need to fixing, then it makes sense.
Yeah. And how do you feel about, for example, biases? So you were saying that a lot of times you might already know what's coming up, so you can just act. But mapping sometimes is a way also for you to reflect on your inherent biases or your
Yeah.
organization's inherent biases. So how do you balance a little bit the action with making sure that you're not just bringing the biases from past mappings or past processes?
Yeah. So one big question is always, if I look at a map, like a client shows me a map or invites me to a crit session, the first thing I look at is what is the data basis for this map.
Mm,
And if it's not stated on the map, like what are the resources used to create the map, then we ask and we dig deeper, and we always look for triangulation. And the rule of thumb is you should always follow what's called triple triangulation. So use at least 3 forms of triangulation, 3 different methods to collect data. So it could be interviews, it could be a survey, it could be observations that you do, but you need at least 3 different ones, because every research method has its biases, right? And like if you do interviews, people don't tell you the truth, but rather like socially accepted answers. If you observe people, they behave differently because they know they are
they're
observed.
the
If you
observer.
do
Yeah.
a survey, you end up with like self-selection biases and so on and so on.
Mm,
So having 3 different research methods is one thing. Then having different data types on a map. Don't only use text on it, but use photos, videos, screenshots, collect artifacts, quote from people, maybe connect to recordings is useful. And then also, who created this map? Is it just a single person? Because we often talk about slipping to the shoes of customers, but forget that we're all wearing our own shoes all the time. So we can't have empathy just like this with someone. But if multiple researchers, again, around 3, look at the same data and come up with and compare the interpretations of it, then you can be pretty sure that the journey map is pretty robust. And that sounds really long and expensive, but it's actually not. It is the fastest way to get to pretty robust qualitative and quantitative research results if you do triple triangulation.
Yeah, of course. Also because it might take a little bit more effort to do those triple triangulation, as you're saying, but then you have less rework maybe in the future when you're taking action. So
Absolutely. You can trust the map. Like the worst thing that can happen is if you have a beautiful journey map that looks very convincing, but it's not based on any data. And we saw that happening too often, right? Then these maps make its way throughout the whole organization, even into the boardroom, and they take strategic decisions based on absolutely no data. What could
yeah,
possibly go wrong?
yeah. I mean, it's easy to just create a marketing piece than an actual decision making piece.
Yeah. And that's what I mean with operationalizing map. Like we really need to put it into action and make sure that it's connected to different sources. So we can also then map out what are our initiatives, what are we doing? Because most things that come or that impact customer experience does not
Mhm.
come from the design team. It comes from anywhere in the organization. Often we are not aware of all these changes. Think about any change of software, any change of standard operating procedure. All these impact customer experience, and we are often not aware of it. But if you use journey maps as a different mental model for that, to also map out what are the different projects the organization is working on, we then start to understand the environment in which we're designing. So we're not only designing for the status quo, but also for the future.
Mm, yeah. And how do you think there's this connection between what we're doing right now also and connecting to the future, understanding this future vision or future perspective, speculating also what we want to achieve in the future?
Yeah. So I always recommend to connect your journey maps with your innovation horizons. Usually,
Mm,
the organization has 3 different ones. Horizon 1 is usually like the next year or so. Horizon 2 might be like the next 3 years or so, and Horizon 3 is like usually like 3 to 7 years. Every organization handles that slightly different, but something like this. Now, if you map out where you are today and where you want to be, like what is your aspiration, then you can use a journey map to also understand what are the ways how we get there. So you can split out the opportunities, like what can we do in Horizon 1? What can we do and achieve within the next year? what can we achieve within the next 3 years, and what are the opportunities for like 5 to 7 years, so we then actually achieve the vision where we want to be in 5 or 7 years.
Yeah. And I mean, when we're thinking about futures thinking and speculative design, sometimes you can do the other way around also, right? The backcasting. Do you feel that also influences how you end up mapping the ideas?
Absolutely. Like, think of it as an emotional journey, right? Where you map out like where are the pain points right now. A very simplified one with just like one line. Usually what we do is like we have those 3 horizons, and what you can add to it, like beside the 3 lanes, is also what is the expected market standard. Like, sometimes you don't define how the experience will look like, but we know like there's this certain technology coming up and competition is working on this part. So you know what is the expectation, the minimum expectation your customers have, and that is the minimum you need to match. So that defines like the minimum of it, and then you can look at, so where can we differentiate compared with our competition, compared with the market? So where can we exceed it on purpose because it adds strategically value to both the customers and through that value to us as an organization through additional revenue.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, you have coming up next month SDN Academy course, right? That is the same title, Journal Management. What are you going to go a little bit about on there? Is there any other things related to that you're going to be talking about?
Yeah, so basically it's a 3-day course, 3 hours per day online. And what we're doing there is on the first day, we really go deep into one journey map. We look at what are the structure of a map, what makes a good map, talk about research, like what I explained about triple triangulation. We then move in the second day on the hierarchy of maps. So how do you connect maps with each other? How do you link maps horizontally and vertically together? How do you get data for maps, data for things like emotional journeys? So it's not just like what a researcher tells us or a designer maps out, but it's actually based on proper data. And the third day, we then look into governance structure. So what are the different roles we need, how we can bring this into the organization, how do we start with it? And then we end with how can we connect this with triple track agile, so with things like research ops, design ops, and DevOps.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think anybody that's interested in learning a little bit more about that, there's the QR code here that you can scan and have a look at registering for the course next month. And I would say that we have a lot of questions already coming up, so I will start also bringing some of those questions. So if you want to ask any questions, put them down here, and then we're going to go through them. So the first one that we have is from, for some reason, eBugged is not showing her name, but I want to say Johanna Salama, that's asking, when can we expect the publication of your new book?
Yeah, that is a question I get often. Well, the current planning says end of next year. We are working on the manuscript and currently working on the cases, and we have already quite a few people who signed up for co-creation of the book. But because we were a little bit slower than expected in writing the main manuscript, we did not start the co-creation process yet. So the process is similar like we did with the Doing book. Already 350 people signed up to co-create the book with us. You can still sign up for it. If you go to the book website, this is journeymanagement.com. You can still sign up. You get early access to chapters. You can review chapters, add text to it and comment on it. Usually we see like long discussions on the side, and then we, from spring on, we bring it all together, and then hopefully end of next year it's out. Looking forward to it because so many people are asking me. It's such a hot topic.
Yes. So here's the QR code if you want to have a look at it. I think it's wonderful, the whole co-creation aspect of it. I remember when I read the service design doing, I saw it and I thought it was very interesting. Also because for me, some of my teachers were there also, so that was cool.
Well, yeah, and it's a way also like, who has the authority to define what service design is, right? And at that time we said, it's not us, it's a community. It's the same for journey management. Who has the authority to define it? Like, it's not one agency or one consultancy or one company who can do that, right? It's us as a community. So it's
Yeah.
again the same idea. Like the tool will be agnostic from any industries, agnostic from any specific tools. It's really about how the approach works and showing loads of different examples. Like even how you can do it with things like Teams um, or like Confluence or something. Like some companies can't afford or for some reason can't use as any specific software, but they're still doing it. I think it's fascinating to see how they're doing it.
100%. And then from Cosette, she was asking, how can maps be more actionable?
Yeah. So maps should be the basis for decision making. And if you like what we do typically is you add to a map, besides like data and so on, you map what are pain points customers are having. And then you use different estimations for it, like what is the impact on a single customer? What is the reach? Like how many people are affected by it? What is the cost that this pain point actually infuses for the organization? Out of that, you can revisualize it as a portfolio for decision making. And what you need to understand is where in your organizations do you actually take these decisions? Who has the power to take a decision? And they usually don't look at the journeys in these meetings or these roles, but they love to look at a portfolio as a summarized view of the data from these journeys and use that then for decision making. So the map itself actually becomes a mental model, an information system in the organization that will help you to bring all the data on the table for better decision making.
Yeah. Then from Katie, she was asking, what are some common misconceptions you hear when talking about mapping or tools?
It's hard to say one. There are many.
You can say your top three.
Just looking at the time. I think one of the biggest misconceptions about journeys is that some people think we do a journey to kind of script the experience and say, this is how the experience will be, right? And then you always hear this argument, yeah, but if we look at all the choices customers have, we don't have one journey, we have hundreds or thousands of journeys people can actually take. And that's right. Like a journey map is not there to reflect reality 100%. And that's not what we're doing in journey maps in geography as well, right? We always reduce information to make it graspable. So what we do with the journey is not to map out how the experience is, but we look at each step and ask ourselves, what can possibly go wrong? And then ask ourselves, are we as an organization prepared for it? Because we know that no journey will be like a textbook journey or like someone just wrote it out, say, this is how the experience will be. No, we're humans. Everything will look different. So ask ourselves, what can possibly go wrong? If you won't quantify that, how often does a certain thing happen? How impactful is it on the one hand for the customer or for the user, on the other hand for the organization? And if you find things that are really happening often, really impactful, then you can go into details there and ask yourself, how can we prevent it in the future? But it's one of the biggest misconceptions. We don't use it to script, we use it to understand what can possibly happen.
Yeah, I mean, all the different possibilities. And then it becomes really important what you're saying about the difference between a static map and a dynamic map, because you really have to keep adapting it to new things that you probably didn't expect were going to happen.
Yes, it's changing, absolutely.
Yeah. And then from Alejandra, she was asking, how would you explain non-designers the difference between a process flow and a journey map?
Yeah. So often process flow use a rather internal perspective to map out what the organization is doing. You can also use it to map out what are all the options a customer have, but you won't go into depth there. It gives you the whole breadth about what are all the options a customer can, like all the choices they have, all the different channels they could use. And one single journey is basically one route that people take throughout this map of throughout this flow chart. But because you take one of them, then you can go more into detail and add actually data to it. And that's why we can better empathize with customers. we better understand what is really going on, and then you can add a layer of internal processes on it, where you can go more into details then about which departments, which roles, which systems are involved, which internal processes are triggered, what's often called a service blueprint. But basically, the basis is, again, a customer journey. You only switch into the internal perspective, understand how is all the stuff we are doing actually influencing the customer experience. So if you like, in short, a journey map is a more detailed perspective of one route through a flowchart.
Mm-hmm. And I think here's a very interesting question. I think that's being debatable quite a lot from Nina about generative AI and
Oh, yeah.
how it's kind of turning some of these conversations upside down. And what is your thought on that? Do you think it's something that we should use to our advantage? It's something that, what do you think?
It's a big topic. Again, we could talk for a long, long time for it.
Yeah.
We did some experiments with it, and we decided not to include it into our tool because we saw that it does actually a lot of harm as well, and that on different levels. I'm not against it at all. Like, I think it will have huge advantage, and there are areas where it can already have a huge advantage. But what we see is that often people have, on the one hand, the users who are mapping the journey, they don't get exposed to the actual data anymore. They don't go into the field and look at how the experience is. They often just send an interview and they put the interview into an AI, and whatever like the insights are or the pain points are out of that, no matter where they really come from, and some of them are made up then by
Yeah.
AI, it's really hard to understand which ones are actually based on data, which ones are not. And then you take decisions on data that you actually don't really understand. And it's actually a very retrospective view, because you only look at the experience, how it is right now. You don't really look at the vision. Where do you want to go with that? So it's okay to use it for those which have a very high effect strength, like the pain points that are very obvious. But honestly, you don't need AI for it, right? Just use it yourself and you see it immediately. Like,
Yeah.
it's a very shallow thing, and I think it also comes with a bias of selection. Like, who are we asking? Because if we only ask our own users, how can we then reach other users? Like, there's a thing called the survivor bias, right? Just have a minute left. I'll be quick. It goes back to the Second World War, when British fighter planes came back to England and they looked at the planes where they got shot, and they tried it to improve the armor wherever they got shot. And interestingly, around the engines, there were no hits. So they said, okay, we don't need to improve the armor there. But those that got hit on the engine, they didn't make it back. Meaning, if we only ask our existing customer base, and if we only use data from our own customers for understanding what we should be doing, what we should be improving, we're probably ending up in a survivor bias, where we should be actually asking those who are not our customers. So how do you get the data from them? And then we're back to traditional design research, where we actually go out and ask ourselves, who should we be asking?
Yeah. And just to visualize, this is a little bit what you're talking about,
Yeah,
right? The
exactly.
plane with the points that you're really just seeing the things that are coming back, and then you don't really see the whole picture of it.
Yeah. So I think AI it will impact all our work. No question about that. And there is really, really interesting usage, but be careful with it, and make conscious decision about what you include, and try to understand the models behind it and see if they were trained on a user base which is rather similar to your user base. Because if not, we also see that the results are pretty misleading.
Yeah. And to that, I don't know why I'm bigger than you. Sorry. To that, we come to the end of our time. So thank you very much for joining us, Mark, and for everybody that had questions. I think there's some other questions that maybe we didn't manage to go through now, but feel free, I think, to tag Mark, and then he can have a look on them later on. Thank you.
Happy to. Thanks for having me. Thanks for all the questions.
Yes. Bye. And to everybody that joined us online or ask any questions, I think we had so many questions, so many good points that I really wanted to bring it for a longer time this time. Thank you very much for joining us for the SDN Community Voices, our weekly touch point between us and you, the community of the Service Design Network. And I hope to see you again next week for yet another very interesting guest and very interesting conversation. So hope you all have a good end of the week and see you again.